He goes on and he tells Timothy in 2 Timothy, when it comes to teaching in the church and preaching, he says this, preach the word. Preach the word. Preach the Bible. Not ideas of man, not theories and philosophies, but preach the word of God. You see, the only reason why anything I'm speaking to you right now is of any relevance is because it is the word of God, you see. And why? Why is that so important? Because, beloved, it is the only words, period, point blank, that can produce life from death. It is the words of life. Do you remember the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000? When Jesus fed the 5,000 people Jesus fed. More than that, actually. Way more than that. But when he fed the 5,000, he fed them, breads and fish and all of these things. Well, listen, at the end of that, he tries to get the people to understand, yes, I did supply for you physically, but I also supply for you spiritually. Because just like you're physically hungry, you're spiritually hungry. And that's when he says, you need to eat of my flesh and drink of my blood and all of these things. And when he said that, those 5,000 people didn't like that. They didn't understand that. They said, this is a hard saying. How can anyone accept that? Now, they turned around and they walked away. Can you imagine that in this church? Right now, if Jesus Christ was to stand up and say something that somebody said, well, that's offensive or hard to understand or hard to accept, and everybody walked out, the deacons and the ministers of this church would lose their minds. And Jesus, you can't just let everybody leave. We just literally went from a church of 5,000 to a church of 12, the 12 disciples there. That's it. Everybody left but the disciples, 12. In our day and time and in our thinking, we would say, well, Jesus has got to go chase them down, right? You got to go get them back, Jesus. Because of what you just said, we just lost 5,000 people and we got to have them back in here. How will we ever keep the lights on without them, right? That's what we'll say. But what does Jesus do? Well, Jesus said, let there be light. So he gets that for free, right? Jesus doesn't run them down and apologizes. In fact, he takes a step forward and he looks at those 12 that remained. And he said, what about you boys? You leaving too? And you know what Peter said? He said this, where would we go? Where would we go? You have the words of life. Where else are we going to get this? Beloved, every single one of us is called to come to a place where we're absolutely, utterly inseparable with the Word of God. It has got to be the foundation and the basis for everything we do. And beloved, every time you see false doctrine rise in the church, it's because someone is teaching something other than the Word of God.